Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's always a deep privilege for me to represent Durham, and at this start of session, it's great to be able to speak on the subject of trade, something I worked on as Parliamentary Secretary to International Trade to the great member from Abbotsford, probably our best trade minister in the history of this country, Mr. Speaker. And it's also great that we're doing so, my first speech with our caucus having grown yesterday, and I'm very proud that the member from Oak Ridge's Aurora, Richmond Hill, brings perspective on trade to our caucus that was lost in the government side, not realizing that trade and security go deeply together, Mr. Speaker. So I'll keep that in mind in the context of my remarks on the comprehensive and progressive agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, really the TPP-11, Mr. Speaker. It's in large part most of the heavy lifting done on the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal was done by the Conservative government, Mr. Speaker. You may realize that during the 2015 election, all the parties, there were 12 at that time, of the United States had come to an agreement. It was quite unusual for that to happen, but unlike what the leader of the Green Party suggested, when there's an international agreement like that, we can't ask them to wait until our election is over, Mr. Speaker. So we got the deal done in a way that didn't pit one industry over another, in a way that Canada was at the table for jobs, not for posturing, not for virtue signaling, not for domestic politics, where the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party actually used trade to advance their social agenda for their electorate in Canada while they're putting hundreds of thousands of jobs on the line, Mr. Speaker. It's probably, of the many failures of this government highlighted in their hashtag summer of failure, perhaps the biggest risk they're playing with our economy is what they're doing on our trade agreements, Mr. Speaker. In the last few years, we've seen countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, the Philippines, India, of course, the whole world knows about that trip, China, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, the United States, all frustrated with Canada, Mr. Speaker. Italy, people are welcome to heckle by yelling out more countries because they're hard to keep track of, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my friend doing that. But we're here to talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP-11, because this represents Canada's reassertion of our role as a Pacific nation, Mr. Speaker, and the fact that in the last 50 years, the Pacific has generated as much wealth than in their previous 100, Mr. Speaker. I had the honor as Parliamentary Secretary to go on the ground along with Senator Yona Martin, along with Barry DeVolen, the former MP for Kawartha Lakes, Mr. Speaker, to help secure the final stages of our free trade agreement with South Korea. Now, they're not part of the TPP, Mr. Speaker, but that was our first free trade agreement in Asia. And it recognizes that Canada is a Pacific nation, and as the middle class grows in Asia, they're demanding the world-class, the world's best agricultural products from our country, Mr. Speaker. Beef, pork, grain and oil seeds, Mr. Speaker. We are world leaders, and Canada is trusted for our high-quality product. You know, my riding's name is Durham, but when world agriculture think of Durham, they don't think of my riding. They think of the wheat developed in Canada, Mr. Speaker. We have been innovators, and our farming families are some of our most committed Canadians to our economy. And these trade deals from South Korea to TPP recognize that. The Trans-Pacific Partnership with the 11 represents almost 500,000 or 500 million consumers. And let's see the wealth that's developed there. China has gone from a country that was considered impoverished 40, 50 years ago to being a world-leading economy, the number 2 economy, Mr. Speaker. When I went to South Korea, I was shocked by the fact that following the Korean War, which over 500 Canadians died serving in, Mr. Speaker, and that's what forged our relationship with that important Asian friend and country, South Korea was one of the largest recipients of food aid following the Korean War. But the actions of Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, and our allies has led to prosperity in that country through security and trade, that today they're one of the largest net donors to food aid around the world, Mr. Speaker. That's remarkable in 50 to 60 years to go from one of the most impoverished to one of the most successful and an ally that we can count on, Mr. Speaker. That's what trade can do. That's what working on trade and security together can do. That's why the member from Newmarket, Aurora, Richmond Hill, after 3 years of banging her head against the wall in a government that's about platitudes and about photographs for their leader, are neglecting our trade relationships, are insulting our foreign allies and friends, and are withering away the prosperity that Canada enjoys. So with TPP, we have the ability to access a combined GDP in these countries of almost $14 trillion. Now, Madam Speaker, and as I said at the outset, under the Harper government, many of our trade deals were centered around the importance of our agricultural sectors and industries. This is going to be part of the case. As I said, this will have us accessing markets that are growing. The prosperity growing in Vietnam, for example, one of the countries, Madam Speaker. Japan, the world's third largest economy. They have a high demand for our pork, beef, and our grains. And they're going to see tariff rates reduced. In 10 to 15 years, all tariffs reduced off of pork and beef, for instance. And if you go to Seoul like I did, you see that Korean barbecue, they love pork, beef, and they prefer Canadian. So by getting in there when we did, we were able to compete on an even playing ground with Australia and the United States. Our product always wins. We just need fair access, Madam Speaker. Wheat and barley will see tariff reductions almost immediately, canola oil within 5 years. There will be huge wins for our agricultural sectors. And representing part of Oshawa and being the son of someone who worked over 33 years at General Motors, there have been some concerns on auto, Madam Speaker, but I'd refer some of the people that have these concerns to the fact that we have a global supply chain for the auto industry. In fact, the globalization of the auto industry started with Canada and the U.S. with the Auto Pact in 1965, where a vehicle rolling off the line in Oshawa was treated as domestic and tariff-free if sold in the United States. And since then, since the 1960s, 80% of the vehicles we've assembled in Canada have been sold in the United States. Yet this minister didn't even mention the auto industry in the NAFTA priority speeches, Madam Speaker. In fact, they took 6 months to put proposals forward on auto. That was a huge failure, and we squandered 6 months. So diversification and the Trans-Pacific Partnership is making sure that our auto parts suppliers and our auto companies are competitive and have access to those markets, Madam Speaker. If there's going to be capital investment, and Mexico, our NAFTA partner, is part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and we're not, where do you think more investment from global automakers, from global auto parts companies will go, Madam Speaker? It will go to the country that has the best access tariff-free around the world. So we need to be at the table. We're going to see 45% of the vehicles made within the TPP countries, the 11 countries, 45% of those vehicles need to be assembled by the member countries, one of those 11 countries. We need to be part of that. Who supports that, Madam Speaker? One of our leading executives, the CEO of Linamar, one of our biggest auto part companies. She supports TPP 11, Madam Speaker. Let me quote what she says. Quote, "Perhaps those opposing TPP are afraid of global competition. I am not. I don't agree that it will be a negative for the auto sector. On the parts side, folks are worried about competition from Asia, but I say we have to be competitive on a global basis, and will do based on efficiency, innovation, and great products," end quote. Linda Hasenfratz, one of our leading executives. Companies like hers, companies like Magna, some of our global automakers like Toyota and others that are assembling in Canada. Toyota's having its Canadian parts distribution plant in Clarington, in my riding, Madam Speaker. This is a global industry. So I'm glad to see the Liberal Party has signed on to our approach on TPP, Madam Speaker. I'm still a bit confused by the NDP's approach, but Conservatives will always stand by fighting for access for our world-class manufacturers, our world-class auto industry, and our world-class farmers, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Whitby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I sat through debates yesterday and today on this particular issue. I heard the member from Essex talk, specifically point to myself as being the member of from Whitby and her chagrin about the CPTPP and what will happen to the auto sector. My member from Durham yesterday as well as today spoke about the confidence that he has in the auto sector, much like this government does have in their competitiveness, their ability to compete on a global market. And I wonder if the member opposite could talk to Durham Region, GM being in our neck of the woods, how we could continue with this particular trade deal to continue to be competitive and to do well, not just by Canadians, but in particular by residents in Durham Region.
The honourable member for Durham.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Whitby for that comment and for bringing the debate home to Durham. We certainly neighbour our ridings. And I know she knows this, Madam Speaker, that the former member from her riding, the late Jim Flaherty, worked closely with Stephen Harper to save the auto industry in Canada, Madam Speaker. A tough time, and for Conservatives, it was a tough decision. But it was a temporary measure to make sure that GM and Chrysler survived, because the hundreds of thousands of jobs that trickled out into the auto parts industry were critical. So whether it's auto plant workers or GM retirees in Whitby, in Oshawa, or in Durham, Madam Speaker, these are important jobs. And as I said at the outset, since 1965, we've always produced to export, mainly to the United States, but we started a very serious diversification effort under the last Conservative government. Very good that that was done now that we have President Trump in the United States who's protectionist. We will continue to do that. And Linamar, Martin-Ria, Magna, these are world-class auto parts and auto companies. We can compete, we have compete, and we will compete, Madam Speaker.